The corridor reeked of antiseptic and ionized blood. Cold light from the crystal ceiling refracted off the marbled floor, where a dark stain stretched unnaturally long. It was the blood of Lieutenant Merrick. Nerea had seen it leave his neck in a red arc no human body should endure. Now he lay still behind her, one arm twisted beneath him, his comband flashing uselessly. Nerea Dazai stood cornered, back against the reinforced wall of the diplomatic antechamber. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her left boot slipped slightly on the wet floor, and she steadied herself, not with strength, but with will. Two Rizek assassins were advancing. Tall skin like obsidian glass, movement smooth like oil in gravity. Their weapons weren't metal. They shimmered like spun mercury, adaptive blades used only in surgical executions. One of them raised a voice, guttural and near musical in its malice. "She does not scream. I prefer the ones who scream." The other chuckled, clicking a mandibular joint. "This one breathes fear without a sound. That's rare." Nerea didn't answer. She didn't flinch, but her fingers moved slowly toward the inside of her waist sash. There, hidden behind protocol badges and authorization seals, was something she wasn't supposed to carry, something no diplomat had used in a century. A flute, old earth bamboo, polished, tuned not for performance but for resonance. She had never used it in front of others, not since Mars. But tonight, no one else would live long enough to witness it. A metallic groan broke the silence. The Rizek froze. Their heads turned sharply toward the steel wall at the end of the corridor. The sensors lining the hallway began to flicker. Lights stuttered, dimmed. The temperature dropped, not by degrees but by presence. Something was waking. Beyond the security bulkhead, behind 10 layers of quantum-locked alloy and acoustic dampeners. The Guardian, a creature older than recorded Arcanian language, had stirred. The Rizek moved simultaneously. One lunged toward Nerea. The other aimed a blade at the failing door seal, too late. With a screeching howl of bent metal and shattered phase locks, the wall exploded outward. Shards of alloy sliced through the air like knives. The shockwave knocked Nerea sideways. Her shoulder slammed into the wall as the breath left her lungs. And then from the dust and light it emerged, taller than 3 men. Skin like woven obsidian and bone. Arms disproportionate, claws dragging lines of heat on the crystal floor. No eyes, no visible mouth, just a mass of pulsing ridges and a low vibration that made Nerea's chest compress. The Rizek shrieked. One fired a pulse dart, the kind that liquefied flesh upon impact. The creature moved before the dart left the barrel. A blur, a scream. One assassin slammed against the ceiling with a sickening crunch, dropped like wet paper. Nerea coughed, blood in her mouth. Her eardrums rang and time seemed disjointed. She rolled away, hand instinctively gripping the flute now in full view. The beast turned, its head, if it had one, tilted toward her. Not a gesture of threat, recognition. Nerea didn't think. She couldn't afford to. She raised the flute to her lips and blew. The first note wavered, broken. Her lungs refused full breath. The second note held, low, trembling, ancient. A melody passed down from a world this creature had never known. A lullaby written in a time before FTL travel, before space diplomacy, before war became protocol. The creature, stilled, its claws stopped twitching. Its vibrations dimmed. It slowly stepped closer, each footfall sending tremors through the ground. Not charging, listening, Nerea closed her eyes. She played the third note. The air shifted. Like a tether stretched across 2 minds, something locked. Not language, not thought, but emotion, pure, deep emotion. Loss, fear, empathy. A thread pulled taut between a woman and something once called monster. The flute sang. The creature lowered its massive head, pressing the side of it to the floor beside her, like a loyal hound bowing. Silence fell. Only her breathing filled the chamber now. The second Rizek assassin, still alive, stumbled backward, visibly shaking. "Impossible," he hissed. "It does not respond, it devours. It obeys nothing." Nerea didn't stop playing. The melody dipped now, quieter, controlled. Her eyes locked with the Rizek S. "This one listens," she said softly. The assassin raised his blade. The flute fell silent. The Guardian's roar shattered the hall. It didn't attack blindly. It targeted. In a single leap, it landed between Nerea and her would-be killer, claws cleaving the Rizek's weapon in two, before ramming him into the crystal wall, so hard that the structure cracked like ice. Nerea stood, slowly, carefully. Her fingers trembled, but her gaze was steady. The beast turned back to her, breathing like a mountain inhaling fog. It waited. Nerea reached out, not to command, but to acknowledge. "Thank you," she whispered. The creature dipped its head again. Behind her, alarms began to sound. Reinforcements were coming. None of them would understand what they were about to see. A human woman, a forgotten melody, and a myth tamed not by force but by feeling. The Guardian turned toward the hall entrance, massive frame shielding her entirely. It gnarled its claws across the floor, preparing. Nerea raised the flute once more and played the next note. Nerea Dazai was not the kind of diplomat who smiled for the press. She rarely smiled at all, unless it was absolutely necessary. At 36, she had already outpaced a generation of Earth's political prodigies, becoming the youngest envoy ever assigned to interspecies negotiation. Her voice, when she chose to use it, carried the clarity of someone who didn't waste words. But more often than not, Nerea let silence do the speaking for her. Silence and music. She was born on Mars, in one of the older subterranean colonies buried beneath the Tharsis Ridge. Her father, a military communications engineer, had specialized in jamming signals and decoding alien language packets. Her mother had been a composer of obsolete things, melodies written in Earth's diatonic scales, unheard by most ears in over a century. Mars had no birds, no breeze, no rustling leaves. The only music was synthetic. But in the Dazai household, every meal, every evening, every moment of grief or joy had a tune. Her mother played an ancient wooden flute, worn smooth by time. Nerea would lie awake in her bunk, long after curfew, listening to the way those notes bent through the recycled air vents, curling around her like unseen hands. Then came the bombing. She was 13 when the Northern Dome was attacked. Political rebels from a fringe Terran purity sect had planted neurochemical devices in the life support system. 87 people died in under a minute. Her mother was among them. Nerea didn't die, but something inside her broke. The trauma shut down her ability to speak, not physically but neurologically. Her father called it selective aphasia, though nothing about it felt selective. For the next 3 years, she didn't utter a single word. Instead, she communicated with a flute, the very one her mother had left behind. While others her age learned programming and interstellar policy, Nerea rebuilt her identity through pitch, tone, and silence. She played in grief, in rage, in confusion, and slowly in understanding. It was during those voiceless years that she discovered her strange gift. When she played, people listened, not just politely but emotionally. Teachers stopped arguments. Her father, once a quiet man of code and circuits, wept at a lullaby she hadn't realized was sad. A Martian botanist claimed that plants bent subtly toward the sound. A visiting AI once asked her, "What is that signal? It makes me reconsider my task hierarchy." By the time she spoke again, at 16, she had already learned the most important thing about language. It was never just about words. Years later, standing before the United Diplomatic Assembly, Nerea still carried that flute. Not openly, of course. Diplomats were discouraged from emotional display, much less musical instruments. But she kept it hidden beneath her official sash, more symbol than tool. A reminder of the woman she had become, precise, silent, and utterly allergic to the theater of politics. She had built her reputation not by talking the loudest, but by reading the room before she entered it. Her ability to intuit stress, fear, deceit, it wasn't just empathy. Some called it preternatural. Others whispered it was genetic enhancement, though no medical file ever confirmed such a thing. She could tell when a negotiation would fail before it began. She once convinced two warring factions to delay their strike by adjusting the pitch of her voice mid-sentence to match the neuro-emotional resonance of their high priest. They had called her the listener. Others, less flatteringly, called her the idealist. Her critics believed she romanticized diplomacy, that she thought emotion could replace structure, that empathy was weakness. They weren't entirely wrong. Nerea hated war. She loathed the calculus of acceptable casualties. She believed, perhaps foolishly, that connection, not control, would determine humanity's long-term survival among the stars. But even she knew there were limits to listening, which was why Arcania terrified her. The mission was classified level indigo. She was to represent Earth in the reopening of diplomatic talks with the Arcanian Coalition, a frozen, glacier-bound world that had once annihilated an entire guest species over a translation error. Arcania didn't tolerate ambiguity. They were infamous for their linguistic rigidity. Their species communicated via harmonic frequency, where inflection carried lethal connotation. A dip in pitch could be interpreted as treason. An elongated vowel could signal declaration of war. Human attempts at automated translation had failed disastrously. Dozens had died in the first decade of contact, but the Council wanted peace. Or more accurately, a corridor through Arcanian space for faster wormhole access. Earth's alliance with the Solari Republic depended on it. And so they sent Nerea. From the moment her ship entered Arcania's upper atmosphere, she felt it, not in her mind but in her body. A kind of pressure, not weight but sound, except there was no noise. A silence too complete to be natural. It was the silence of something holding its breath. The Arcanian Diplomatic Center was located beneath a solid kilometer of glacial quartz, its halls shaped in spiral acoustics. No straight corridors, no hard corners, every space was designed for sonic dampening. Even her footsteps were muffled. She passed no guards, no greeters. Just the occasional glyph etched into the walls, mathematical hymns, she realized. Equations written in harmonic intervals. When she stepped into the central atrium, the so-called zone of equal air, she paused. It wasn't fear, it was resonance, something in the walls, the floor. The ceiling vibrated faintly in tune with her body's natural rhythm. Not her heart rate, deeper than that, a frequency that hummed below conscious thought. She reached instinctively for the flute beneath her sash, not to play it, just to touch it. She didn't know it yet, but something had already noticed her. Not a person, not a translator, something older. Something awake, and it was listening. The first meeting was already a failure before the opening chime faded. Nerea stepped into the circular negotiation chamber, her posture neutral, breath held steady, and took her seat as protocol dictated, equal distance from each delegation. The air shimmered slightly from the harmonic filters embedded in the ceiling, softening any unintentional emotional bleed. It was meant to prevent conflict. It only succeeded in muting tension, not dissolving it. The representatives from Rizek Prime arrived second. Towering reptilian bipeds with translucent skin and bioluminescent veins, they moved in sync. Each breath measured to the rhythm of their communal pulse. They glanced at Nerea, then at each other. Without a word, they shifted their path and took seats across the chamber. deliberately outside the harmonic balance zone. Nerea kept her face unreadable, but the diplomatic aide beside her leaned in. Whispering, "Is that violation of alignment?" It was worse. One of the Rizek delegates, a tall female with an opalescent neck frill, tilted her head and addressed the chamber in thick common. "The resonance of your kind disrupts the structure of our neural field." She did not look at Nerea directly. Her presence agitates the inner flow. "I request harmonic distance. No apology, no offer of compromise. Just a cold declaration of incompatibility." Before Nerea could respond, the Arcanian chairperson, the mediator of the talks, raised one arm and struck a low chime. The vibration settled the room like a blanket of frost. The meeting continued, brief, shallow exchanges. Earth presented its position. The Rizek offered clipped replies. The Arcanian representative said almost nothing, only listened, recorded, and hummed in low intervals of acknowledgement. When the session ended and the chamber dimmed to indicate dispersal, Nerea was approached not by a delegate, but by the Arcanian chief facilitator. A tall figure wrapped in robes that shimmered like polished ice, their voice barely above the ambient hum of the hall. They didn't speak aloud. Instead, they transmitted directly to her via tonal overlay, a practice considered intrusive, but not uncommon on Arcania. "Ambassador Daze," the voice whispered in her auditory cortex, "a word in private." They moved to a side corridor, narrow, dim, the walls embedded with ancient acoustic latticework. There were no cameras, no translators. The facilitator turned to her. Their eyes, if those indents on their head could be called that, remained unfocused. "Your harmonic field is unbalanced," they said calmly. Nerea blinked. "I'm not transmitting anything. I've adhered to all pitch regulations." "Not intentional, not vocal, deeper," she frowned. "Then what is it?" The Arcanian hesitated, then said something she wasn't expecting. "You carry an old vibration, earthborn, melodic." Unshielded, her hand brushed the sash at her waist instinctively. The flute, she had never played it here, not once. But the Arcanian had felt it, not the sound but the resonance. Then came the warning. "After sunset, refrain from projecting sound." Their tone dropped into a lower frequency, one used for grave meaning. "This compound obeys reason by day, but after dusk, there are echoes we do not command." Before she could ask more, they turned and vanished down the hall, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like pressure in her ears. That night Nerea did not sleep easily. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were not her own. She stood in the central atrium again, but it was darker, colder. The crystal arches overhead had cracked. Frost climbed the walls like veins. A sound vibrated beneath her feet, a low, broken growl, as if something massive were suffocating on silence. The growl rose, warbled, and stopped, then repeated. Then again, each time slightly louder, slightly more desperate. Like something trying to scream but failing. She woke up gasping, heart racing. The sound still echoing in her chest, like the tail end of a thunderclap. The dreams returned the next night, and the next, the fourth morning after another restless sleep. Nerea did what she knew she shouldn't. She went searching. The main negotiation hall sat at the top of the spiral core, a towering structure surrounded by quarters, analysis rooms, and sealed wings no one spoke about. She had memorized the layout days before. And she knew there was one chamber left unassigned on every official document. A soundproof room, buried at the deepest point of the core. No name, no function, only silence. She descended alone, no escort, no badge clearance. Just the low hum of the hallways, adjusting to her movement. The air grew colder. The harmonic dampeners in the walls began to hiss faintly, as though resisting her presence. And then she found it, a thick door covered in Arcanian script. but not modern script, pre-colonial runes, etched into a grid of silver and obsidian. She recognized one word only, buried in the archaic phrasing. Containment. Her hand hovered over the interface. It didn't respond to voice, ID, or touch. So instead, Nerea did what no diplomat would be advised to do. She took out her flute, a short breath, 3 notes. Low, round, minor key. Notes her mother had played when trying to lull her infant mind into sleep. Notes meant for comfort, not command. The wall vibrated. A resonance came back, not a replay, not a mimic. A reply, 1 note, drawn out, rough, like something trying to remember how to speak. Nerea stepped back. Her heart beat like war drums in her ears. She didn't know what was inside, but it had heard her. And it had answered. The conference broke apart with the cold precision of a failing system. On the 3rd day of negotiations, just as the ambient hall tones signaled adjournment, 2 planetary representatives collapsed mid-sentence, clutching their throats. A faint mist lingered in the air, chemical, silent, invisible. Panic surged before alarms could. The Reset guards reacted first, withdrawing weapons not meant for use inside the diplomatic compound. The Arcanian facilitator sealed the doors within 3 seconds. Earth's delegation was detained within 5. In less than 10 minutes, diplomacy dissolved into containment protocol. 2 dead, 1 from Valish, another from the Hellion Belt. Both victims had been aligned with Earth's trade initiative, and within hours, rumors began to spread. Nerea was escorted, more like escorted at weapon point, back to her quarters and locked under protective isolation. But protection wasn't the purpose. She had become the suspect. Inside her quarters, the filtered light buzzed louder than usual, and her comms panel blinked in error codes she didn't recognize. She tried to send a message to the Terran delegation office. No reply, then another, silence. At 23:08 local time, a message did arrive on a back channel she never used. It bore her voice, her face, her authorization code. This act will open the path. Let them fall, and they will follow us into light. A direct admission of guilt, but she had never recorded it. By 23:10, the message had spread to every delegation channel. Even the Arcanian silence broke into scattered chords of warning. Someone had forged her identity perfectly. It wasn't just slander. It was framing. She had no weapons, no way to prove anything. And no one left to trust. She stood still for a long time, letting the air circulate around her, cold and antiseptic. She pressed her fingers to her waist, to the hidden fold where the flute still rested. That one object, forgotten by every security scan, was the only thing that hadn't betrayed her. And then came the sound, a faint click, a whisper of air being displaced in the outer corridor. She froze, footsteps, too soft for boots, too light for guards. She backed toward the corner of the room, letting the internal scanner reflect against her peripheral vision. 2 life signatures, both Reset, and then asterisk lights out. Her room went black, silent. Emergency systems didn't engage. Backup protocols were bypassed, only darkness and breath. They had disabled everything, not from outside. From within the system, the door hissed open. She didn't wait. Instinct took her. She lunged toward the narrow auxiliary vent at the edge of the panel wall. Tore it open with a precision no protocol training had taught her, and slid into the spine of the compound. Wires, metal, frost, and beneath it all a low pulse deeper than the building itself. Like a heart beating under ice, her path wasn't random. She knew exactly where she was going, the forbidden chamber, the one she'd found days ago. Now pulsing with a frequency that was no longer passive. It had heard the betrayal, now it was waiting. She reached the door, barely breathing, hands scraped from crawling. The Reset were behind her. She could hear them now. Closer, faster. She placed a trembling hand on the rune-etched panel. Nothing, no response. She reached into her sash and pulled out the flute. 3 notes sharp rising, the wall shuddered. The runes glowed blue. Then the door opened. A rush of air escaped, a cold so biting it froze the breath in her throat. Mist curled around her boots as she stepped into the containment chamber. And there it was, the guardian, taller than she remembered. Its body wrapped in coiled tissue like living armor, layered with ridges that glowed faintly in the dark. Its skin shimmered with crystals formed from decades of suspended sleep. It was asleep, but not unconscious. It knew she was there. The room was filled with a thick layer of vapor, swirling around the base of its containment pedestal. Above it, ancient Arcanian glyphs pulsed faintly, like wards grown weary. For a moment, Nerea could not breathe, and then they came, the 2 Rizek assassins. She turned toward them, her body between the beast and the doorway. One of them raised a weapon. The other simply smiled, if that curled expression could be called a smile. "This is the truth of your peace," he hissed. "It ends here." She did not speak. She lifted the flute and began to play. The sound didn't echo, it melted, 3 notes, then 5. Then the song, Ami no Yuta, your song, her mother's last composition. Written for a world that no longer listened. The notes trembled. Not from her fingers, but from memory. Each measure was a heartbeat. Each phrase a goodbye. She played as if her life were stitched into the melody, and in that moment it was. The guardian stirred, first a twitch, then a breath. Then silence broke, its massive head lifted, its limbs cracked with the stiffness of a century. The mist around it recoiled, but it didn't roar, it looked at her. And in that look was something impossible, recognition. No words, no understanding, but resonance. Nerea fell to her knees. The Rizek shouted something, but she didn't hear it. Her vision darkened, her strength failed. The last note left her lips like a prayer. Then nothing, darkness took her, she awoke to warmth. Not heat, presence, she was no longer on the floor. She had been moved, gently against the wall, wrapped in thermal mesh. The chamber's frost no longer touched her skin, and beside her the guardian watched. It did not move, but it stood between her and the door. Between her and the rest of the world, waiting, protecting. Not because it was ordered, but because it had heard her song. The second attack was not subtle. It began with a frequency just above human hearing. But Nerea felt it in her bones before the tremors hit. The walls of the diplomatic compound trembled, lights flickered and died. Emergency systems failed to engage. This time, no alarms were triggered. No escape routes opened. No facilitators came to restore order. Nerea knew before she reached the corridor, no one else was alive. She stood at the threshold of the main access tunnel, ice biting her breath, and watched as smoke coiled from the hall vents like fingers searching for warmth. Bodies lay crumpled in the side chambers, diplomats, aides, translators, all silenced by something precise and emotionless. The same toxin that had failed to kill her in the first attempt had now succeeded. Not in error but design, her hand tightened around the flute. Her voice had never carried far in these walls, but the melody might. She played 2 sharp notes, distinct, urgent. From the lower levels the guardian beast stirred. It came in silence, moving faster than any machine, crouched low, its bulk impossibly graceful. When it reached her, its body blocked the smoke like a wall. For a moment, the 2 stood in a frozen corridor of death, a woman and a creature whose name had been buried in Arcanian myth. She nodded once. It understood. The guardian turned and tore through the sealed security gate, its claws ripping metal apart as if it were skin. Nerea followed, boots sliding on frost, lungs burning. Every hallway led upward, each level more corrupted than the last. Systems offline, life signatures none. they reached the command spire, the highest point of the compound, where internal transmissions were archived and filtered for interstellar channels. A place restricted to human officers, Nerea had never been allowed here. Now no one was left to stop her. She crossed the control threshold. The walls hummed faintly. Some systems were still running, manual backup powered by geothermal cores. Her fingers danced over the ancient analog consoles, bypassing firewalls not meant to withstand the subtle skills of a diplomat's training. Within minutes, she found what she was never supposed to see. A folder, encrypted but clearly labeled. Operation Aurora, Contingency Protocol/Earth Directive. She opened it. And the world broke again. Target, Disrupt Arcanian Rezek Alliance Method, Staged Chemical Assassination. With controlled fallout objective. Collapse current peace accord to justify rearmament resolution 112G long-term goal. Establish interstellar corridor monopoly under Terran jurisdiction. The directive was signed. Not by enemies, by her own government. Nerea stepped back from the console, shaking. Her legs wanted to give, but rage kept her upright. All of it, the isolation, the fake message, the attack, engineered to cast her as a traitor. Not to ruin her, but to collapse peace. She had been a pawn. The Rezek were victims. The Arcanian warnings weren't superstition, they were truth, twisted into caution. The beast beside her snarled low, not at her, but at the frequencies laced through the walls. It too understood. It too had been used once, locked away, forgotten, because its truth had not been convenient. Her hands moved slowly. She reached into the flute, unlocking the base compartment. Inside, a memory node, not a weapon but a recorder. It had been capturing everything since Arcania, coded through the music she played. Every vibration, every meeting, every whispered threat. She had proof, and a choice. She could transmit the data back to Earth, straight to the Terran assembly. It would bury the mission, bury her, or she stared at the Guardian. And something else ignited, not revenge, not survival. Resonance. She connected the recorder to the broadcast console. Not to send a message to the assembly, but to every inhabited planet on the diplomatic network. Her hands hovered over the activation pad. She turned to the beast. She didn't speak, she played, one long low note, then another sharp climbing. The Guardian replied, not with words but with sound. A thunderous breath that shook the spire, a growl that wasn't anger but memory. The walls glowed with resonance. Together they played. Not a melody of triumph, not a declaration of war, but a testimony, a song composed between two beings who had been silenced. One human, one forgot, one betrayed by politics. The other locked away because it had once refused to kill. The room filled with vibration. Data pulses streamed in rhythm with the notes. The melody was carried across every channel, translated not by words, but by harmonic conversion. Listeners across the quadrant didn't understand the music with logic. They felt it. Images embedded in the frequency followed. Footage of the attack, the forged message, the directive. The buried files, proof not as accusation but as echo. The final segment. The security feed of Nerea playing before the beast in the containment chamber, its slow awakening. Its silent gaze, its restraint, at the base of the spire. The compound shuddered as a new signal surged upward, an ancient Arcanian chord layered beneath the music. It activated the harmonic beacon. The storm outside quieted. And then they came. Arcanian soldiers, glacial armor gleaming, weapons drawn, emerged from the frost fog of the outer perimeter. They surrounded the tower but did not fire. The music was still playing. One by one they lowered their weapons. Then one by one they dropped to their knees. Not in surrender, not in fear, in recognition. They had heard this song before, in legends of a massacre a century ago. of a creature who refused to slaughter, of a melody buried in snow and silence. Now the myth stood before them, breathing, testifying. The music reached its final note, a long descending whisper, a farewell to illusion. Then silence. Nerea lowered the flute, the transmission stopped. She didn't say anything, she didn't have to. The guardian stepped forward, placed a single claw against the console, then retreated into the mist of the broken corridor, vanishing like a breath into winter. And all across the stars, the silence that followed would ring louder than any speech. The arrest order for Nerea Dazai was rescinded less than 48 hours after the broadcast. The Earth Assembly, faced with undeniable evidence of its own orchestration, scrambled to contain the political aftershock. High-ranking officials resigned. The Terran Defense Oversight Board was disbanded. Operation Aurora, now a symbol of betrayal, was exposed in full to the interstellar public. No spin, no salvage. On Arcania, where truth was measured in resonance. The song that had been heard once echoed again, not through speakers, but in the marrow of the people. The Arcanian leaders stepped down quietly. A new council was formed, not just Arcanian, not just Rizek, not just Terran. For the first time in diplomatic history, a multi-species coalition was built around shared silence. A mutual understanding that words alone could not hold peace. And what of the creature? The guardian beast, once contained beneath centuries of frost and myth, did not return to its cold chamber. No effort was made to force it. No research team attempted capture. There were no sedatives, no restraints, no branding of specimen. Instead, it walked alone, through the outer gates past the ruined embassies, out into the white desert of Arcania's forgotten plains, where stories said its kind had once roamed before they were declared incompatible with civilization. The Arcanian soldiers watched from the ridge as it paused on a rise of crystal dust, the wind wrapping around its silhouette like a shroud. Then it disappeared into the shimmer of sun and ice. No one followed, none dared, and still, it was not the end. On Earth, Nerea was welcomed as a hero. Accolades arrived in formal declarations, couriered in sleek diplomatic shells. Interviews were requested, documentaries commissioned. Her likeness was turned into a sculpture by an AI-assisted artist on Luna Colony. She accepted none of it. In the first public message after her return, Nerea appeared not in formal dress, but in a simple gray tunic, standing before a blank background. She spoke only one sentence. What I did wasn't heroic, it was necessary. What we allowed to happen before, that was the real silence. Then she resigned from the diplomatic council. No press conference, no second statement. She returned to her private home beneath the Martian cliffs of Olympus Mons, where the soil was red and the air thin, and where a wooden flute still rested on a shelf of stone. But the sound did not end there. What began in ice continued in air. Across the quadrant, younglings of every species began to imitate the broadcast. First it was mimicry, notes captured and copied by ear. Then came recordings, then interpretations. They called it Symphony Zero, not the beginning of a sequence, but a return to something before numbering mattered. A collaboration not between musicians, but between beings. Between pain and restraint, between fear and mercy. The piece was banned in some colonies, too emotional, some claimed. Too ambiguous, too dangerous, but banning it only made it spread faster. Children played it in schools, first in underground chords on basic instruments, then in full resonance on harmonically linked platforms. A conservatory on Europa translated it into color-based light for blind students. A child on the asteroid city of Varnes played it using only breath and sand. The melody took shape in countless forms, but always the same progression, a hesitant beginning, a searching middle, and an ending that did not resolve but listened. It became not a song but a gesture, a way to say, "I'm not here to hurt you." And in one quiet sector of an outer moon, an alien child sat beneath a sloping dune, clutching a makeshift flute made of hollowed bone. Her hands were unsure, her breath unsteady, still she played. 3 notes, then 5, then the full phrasing of what she only knew as 0. Behind her, movement stirred in the canyon's edge. A figure emerged, massive, scaled, hunched beneath the weight of extinction. It was not the guardian, but something of its kind. It paused, it tilted its head, it listened, and then it sat. Quietly, without fear, without hunger, only presence. The girl kept playing, and the sound continued across stars once scarred by silence. Not loud, not perfect, but real. There were no heroes in this story. No banners raised, no victory parades, no glorious monuments etched with names that would echo through history. There was no war, only a lie uncovered, only a silence broken. Only a choice, made in the heart of a woman who could have destroyed her enemies with truth wrapped in fury, but instead chose something quieter, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. She chose to be understood. Nerea Dazai never held a weapon, never gave a speech that changed the course of governments, never fired a shot nor stopped one. She was not a soldier. She never claimed to be, and yet peace began in her presence. Not because of her power, but because of her refusal to use it like everyone expected. On the other side of history stood the Guardian, a creature once feared into myth, locked beneath a world too afraid to listen. It had been labeled a beast, its instincts measured in projected violence, its mind dismissed as primitive. But when it awoke, it did not kill, not out of weakness, out of choice. And in that single moment of restraint, it became more than what Arcanian legends claimed. It became a mirror, and in that reflection, Nerea recognized herself. She, too, had been locked into systems built by fear. Political protocol, emotional suppression, strategic silence. All tools crafted by people who believed empathy was a liability, and peace a negotiation of pressure. But the flute she carried, the one her mother had played beneath the Martian soil, in a home carved from rock and grief, had never obeyed politics. It obeyed resonance, it responded only to truth, so she played it. Not to manipulate, not to impress, but to offer a language that had been lost in the noise of war machines and transmission towers. A melody as old as lullabies, a sound not built for power, but for connection. And the impossible happened, not because a monster changed, but because someone believed it wasn't one. In the weeks that followed the collapse of Operation Aurora, thousands of commentaries flooded the diplomatic channels. Analysts searched for the turning point. Some said it was the data leak. Others cited the Arcanian soldiers kneeling at the spire. A few pointed to the moment when the creature tore through steel not to attack, but to clear a path. But they all missed the same thing. The victory happened before any of it. It happened the moment Nerea stood in front of that containment door and chose to play a song instead of run. It happened the moment the Guardian, towering and free, looked into her and saw not prey, not even threat, but invitation. It happened when neither of them spoke, but both understood. What followed was not peace through superiority, it was peace through surrender. Not the surrender of ideals, but the surrender of fear. The choice to not destroy, even when justified. The courage to not retaliate, even when wounded. And the wisdom to listen, even when silence seemed safer. In the years to come, the events on Arcania would be studied, dramatized, politicized. But the truest message could not be packaged. It was passed quietly, note by note, into the hands of children, refugees, alien outcasts, and exiles who had never seen a battlefield but knew what it meant to be caged by misunderstanding. The message was not an anthem, It was a question, a gentle, dangerous question. If you are human, do not ask how many lives your technology can take. Ask instead, can you play a song that makes others stop wanting to kill you? That question would haunt leaders more than any threat. Because it stripped away all excuses. It demanded vulnerability in place of power, creativity in place of control, art in place of artillery. And it reminded them of something terrifying. Peace cannot be engineered. It must be offered, and that offering must come first, not after conquest, not as apology, but as a melody that says, I am here. I do not wish to harm you. Can you hear me? That's why they called it Symphony Zero. Not because it was the first, but because it reset everything. It reminded the stars that not all monsters have claws, and not all humans are saviors, and sometimes the most important victories leave no flag in the soil, only a lingering chord in the cold air. One that says, we did not destroy each other today, we chose something else.